In the pre-dawn gloom of September 16, 1977, a purple Mini 1275 GT swerved off a West London road and smashed head-on into a sycamore tree. The impact crumpled the tiny car like a concertina, instantly killing its passenger, glam rock icon Marc Bolan, just 2 weeks shy of his 30th birthday. Bolan's girlfriend, American singer Gloria Jones, had been at the wheel, and though she survived with serious injuries, the flamboyant star, who once strutted under spotlights, now lay lifeless amidst twisted metal. Eerily, Bolan had always feared he would die in a car crash. He never learned to drive, haunted by a premonition of an early death on the road. On that dark morning, the prophecy became reality, ending the life of one of rock's most glittering meteors in a scene of broken glass and tragedy. In this episode, we are taking a trip into Bolan's glittering world through both the spotlight's glare and the backstage shadows, the controversies and dramas that haunted his personal life, his complex friendship with David Bowie, and the truth behind that final, fateful night that sealed his legend. Welcome to Rock and Roll Mysteries. Marc Feld entered the world on September 30th, 1947, in post-war Hackney, East London. The second son of a Jewish father, lorry driver Simeon Sid Feld, and Anglican market stall worker Phyllis, Marc grew up in a modest flat at 25 Stoke Newington Common. Hackney's bomb-scarred streets were an unlikely cradle for a future pop visionary. Yet from early on, Marc seemed, marked by destiny. I always knew I was different, right from the start, right from the moment I was born, he later said. As a child, he would slip into make-believe personas whenever bullied. He would often adopt the bravado of fictional heroes to stand his ground. If someone picked on him, he'd take on a character that was stronger, said his brother Harry, and he explained that young Marc's favourite alter ego was Mighty Joe Young, the giant gorilla. Bolan's early inspirations were taken from the icons of rock and roll and the pages of fantasy novels. One formative moment came when his father brought home a 78 RPM record of Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock. Young Marc had begged for a different tune, but the instant Haley's jaunty rock hit the turntable, he was thunderstruck. Just one play of that, and I chucked the other record out the window, he later said. From then on, Marc was enamored with the rebellious sounds of early rockers, like Eddie Cochran, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley. He spent his pocket money on records and would haunt the local Hackney Empire Theatre to watch live music TV shows being filmed. At 13, after one such show at the Hackney Empire, he cheekily accosted his idol, Eddie Cochran, who was impressed enough to let Marc carry his guitar to a waiting limousine. The wide-eyed London schoolboy was already brushing against the stars he yearned to join. However, he would not only emulate Cochran's life, but also his death. Through his teens, Marc Feld's self-confidence was blossoming into something of a personal mythology. That said, his school life was a disaster. He got into trouble for some misdemeanor and was sent to the headmaster to get caned as punishment. Only instead of holding out his hand to take the beating, he nutted the headmaster. Unsurprisingly, he was expelled on the spot. So, instead of maths and geography, he voraciously read fantasy literature. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings was a favourite, and fixated on flamboyant historical figures like Regency dandy Beau Brummel. Bolan would later say, 95% of my success is the way I look. Look and presence is what people pick up on. Indeed, the team began crafting his image as carefully as his musical skills. He joined a modelling agency and appeared in a fashion shoot as a quintessential 60s model, as well as on a TV show called Orlando as an extra. Already keenly aware of appearance, Marc cultivated a natty wardrobe, a peacock's pose, and a cryptic personal charm. He had already formed a skiffle band at age 9 and played guitar in a schoolgirl outfit band called Susie and the Hula Hoops, alongside a young singer named Helen Shapiro. Each small step, every band, every persona, was to his mind part of a grand march toward fame. He drifted through London's music scene in the mid-1960s, hustling for any chance to break in. He almost caught a break with former child star Alan Warren, who had befriended Marc and shared a flat with him. Bolan laid down a few tracks under the nom de plume Toby Tyler, which Warren then used to pay his overdue rent, which was due to the famous property mogul David Kirsch. Kirsch did nothing with Bolan's recording tapes and contract, so his mum went round to Kirsch and kicked up a right fuss until he tore up the contract and gave her back the tapes. Meanwhile, Mark pestered famed producer Joe Meek for an audition, recorded a few obscure singles, signed to Decca Records and rechristened himself with a stage name, Mark Bolan. How he got the name has long been debated. Some say it was a contraction of Bob Dylan's name, but Bolan claimed Decca just gave it to him without any particular reason other than it sounded cool. The teenage Bolan then approached manager Simon Napier Bell and declared he would be the biggest British rock star ever. Napier Bell was amused and intrigued. "I was impressed by Mark's self-belief," the manager recalled. He also said that the boy's elfin prettiness and conviction were impossible to ignore. Parlophone Records agreed to give Bolan a try, and they released his first single, Hippie Gumbo, in late 1966. The song flopped, but Bolan's foot was in the door. More importantly, it caught the attention of BBC DJ John Peel, who became Bolan's earliest champion and future ally. By 1967, the 19-year-old Bolan was a fixture in London's Bohemian Underground. He briefly joined a mod site band called John's Children, where his flamboyance made a big impact. One Bolan-penned single with the group, Desdemona, was banned by the BBC for the rather saucy lyric, "Lift up your skirt and fly." The controversy only elevated Bolan's mystique as an angel-faced troublemaker. The band decided to double down and titled the US release of their album Orgasm, which caused a kerfuffle with the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, who got the album banned for 4 years and presumably don't believe in orgasms. John's Children's brief run fizzled out by 1968 amid some on-stage mayhem. They went on tour with The Who and were booted by the bigger band, rather amusingly for being too loud and violent, as Pete Townsend put it at the time. Bolan and co went bananas on stage, smashing their instruments, staging fights and whipping up crowds into full-on riots. The Who weren't amused but got their revenge on the main protagonist, drummer Chris Townsend, by literally blowing him off stage with flash powder, a la Spinal Tap. Mind you, it seems it was all taken in good spirits, as Townsend would later briefly replace Keith Moon, ironically after Moon wounded himself while smashing up his own kit. With all this, Mark Bolan had gotten a taste of notoriety, and he wanted more. That same year, Bolan persuaded producer Tony Visconti to attend one of his odd acoustic duo performances at the Middle-earth Club. Billing themselves grandly as Tyrannosaurus Rex, Bolan and percussionist Steve Peregrine Took sat cross-legged, Bolan in threadbare hippie attire, spinning bewitching fairy tale songs on an out-of-tune guitar. Visconti recalls the music as tribal, yet lifted by the elegance of Mark's lyrics, based on Tolkien and Norse Celtic imagery. Sensing some raw talent, Visconti took the ragtag duo under his wing. Over the next 2 years, he produced Tyrannosaurus Rex's albums, with titles like My People Were Fair and Had Sky in Their Hair. The records earned Bolan a small cult following among Britain's late 60s hippie folk scene. DJ John Peel championed Bolan relentlessly, affectionately calling him a flower child with a knife up his sleeve. Bolan's knife up the sleeve ambition soon pushed him to evolve beyond acoustic psychedelia. In 1969, after a falling out with the unreliable and drug-prone Steve Took, Bolan replaced him with a new percussionist, Mickey Finn. With Finn's impish glam look complementing Bolan's, the duo plugged in electric guitars and shortened the band's cumbersome name to the sleeker T-Rex. When Tyrannosaurus Rex morphed into T-Rex, one writer noted, mystic aura and small, attentive audiences were replaced by wild sexuality and riotous crowds. Bolan was ready to trade the underground mystic image for full-fledged pop stardom. In the autumn of 1970, the transition paid off spectacularly. Bolan wrote a catchy boogie tune called Ride a White Swan, layering playful nonsense lyrics over a simple electric riff. The song soared into the UK top 10, bringing Bolan onto BBC's Top of the Pops for the first time. For the occasion, he dusted his sharp cheekbones with glitter borrowed from his wife June's makeup case. This was a tiny gesture that would nonetheless be frequently cited as the birth of glam rock. Under the studio lights, Bolan's face sparkled. He looked like a pixie who had commandeered Chuck Berry's electric guitar. Teenage Britain went wild. Ride a White Swan was swiftly followed by Hot Love, a sinuous 3-minute pop romp that shot to #1 in early 1971. During a Top of the Pops performance of Hot Love, Bolan appeared in satin trousers and with glittery teardrops beneath his eyes. He was oozing playful androgyny. It was an electric mix of spectacle and sound, and it ignited nothing short of a cultural craze. By 1972, T-Rextasy was in full swing. Bolan, now backed by a full band including Finn on bongos, bassist Steve Curry and drummer Bill Legend, could do no wrong on the UK charts. The band's landmark album, Electric Warrior, spent 6 weeks at #1, and its follow-up, The Slider, also shot into the top 20 on both sides of the Atlantic. In between, Bolan churned out a delirious string of smash singles. The sleazy groove Get It On, Bang a Gong in summer 71, the acoustic rocker Telegram Sam and ecstatic metal Guru in 72, each greeted by hysterical crowds and high-pitched screams wherever Bolan appeared. The scope of Bolan's fame was unprecedented in Britain since the Beatles' heyday. Fans mobbed his appearances, plastered their bedroom walls with his photos, and imitated his corkscrew hair and satin clothing. In fact, ex-Beatle Ringo Starr was so struck by Bolan's popularity that he directed a feature film, Born to Boogie, in 1972 to document it. The movie, centered around T-Rex's sold-out Wembley concerts, aimed to capture Bolan's Beatlemania-like grip on his young audience, and included surreal scenes of Bolan jamming with Ringo and Elton John. Even the Beatles, it seemed, recognized that Mark had tapped into the same vein of mass adulation they once commanded. At the height of his glam reign in 1972, Bolan mesmerized TV audiences with flamboyant performances, such as one in which he invited Elton John to join T-Rex on stage for a glitter-drenched rendition of Children of the Revolution. Bolan, decked in metallic satin and armed with his Gibson Flying V guitar, stood only 5 feet 5 inches, but commanded the stage with outsized charisma. He was in his element, trading showy riffs with Elton's boogie-woogie piano flourishes. For a generation of kids in drab early 70s Britain, Bolan's television appearances felt like permission to dream in neon colours. For all the joy he brought his fans, Bolan's flamboyance also ruffled conservative feathers, and this time they were homegrown rather than American. One of his Top of the Pops outfits, a cheap toy Roman breastplate from Woolworths, slipped mid-performance and exposed one of his nipples on national TV. This provoked a minor uproar. Bolan revelled in the drama. Like Bowie, he understood that outraging the old guard was part of the fun. Glitter on the cheeks, gold shoes, tights. Bolan pushed the boundaries of acceptable male presentation, and many straight-laced Britons were utterly weirded out by the sight. It only made the kids love him more. One relationship would epitomise Bolan's fierce, competitive fire, and it was, of course, his complex friendship with a fellow London kid named David Bowie. The two had met as teenagers during the mod era, when Bolan cheekily introduced himself to Bowie as Kid Mod, and went on to critique Bowie's footwear. "Your shoes are crap," he scoffed. Despite that rocky meeting, they became pals and occasional collaborators. As Bolan's star ascended first, he didn't hesitate to laud his success over Bowie in jest and sometimes in earnest. In 1970, Bowie was looking for a way out of being labelled a one-hit wonder after the success of Space Oddity. He wrote a song called The Prettiest Star and asked Mark to play guitar, only to be flatly told by June that Mark was too important to be a mere guitarist for a nobody like David Bowie. Mark did play on the track in the end, and it sold a measly 700-odd copies. Bolan even hired Bowie to open T-Rex concerts not with music, but with a mime act, a novelty that saw Bowie roundly booed by Bolan's fans each night. According to Tony Visconti, Bolan took great sadistic delight in seeing his old friends struggle on those tours. It was an early hint of Bolan's dark ego, flaring behind the flower child facade, and as 1973 dawned, both Mark's unchecked ego and a serious challenge from Bowie were about to put cracks in his glittering throne. By 1973, Mark Bolan was a bona fide superstar, and he knew it. The press crowned him the glam rock king, and even established rock royalty paid their dues. John Lennon affectionately nicknamed him Mark the Spark. Bolan basked in adulation on one hand and wielded arrogance on the other, and he was saving his sharpest barbs for the man he saw as beneath him, Bowie. I don't consider David to be even remotely near big enough to give me any competition, he boasted to interviewer and filmmaker Cameron Crowe in 1973. He just doesn't have that sort of quality. I do. I always have, Bolan proclaimed, lumping Bowie below himself, while anointing peers like Rod Stewart, Elton John and Mick Jagger as his true competition. Those cocky words would soon come back to haunt him as Bowie's star exploded. But at that moment, Mark's confidence seemed unshakable. However, 1973 was a turning point. Bolan scored another UK top 3 hit with a raw, riff-driven 20th century boy. Yet the glam rock wave he helped create was beginning to crest, and new musical winds were blowing. Chief among them was, of course, David Bowie, who in mid-1972 had unveiled his Ziggy Stardust persona and finally vaulted to superstardom. Bowie's flamboyant, alien alter ego, clearly influenced by Bolan's trailblazing, became an international sensation, especially after the Ziggy Stardust album and an 18-month world tour that turned Bowie into a global icon. For a while in 1973, Bowie and Bolan ran neck and neck on the charts, each scoring number 3 hits just months apart. Bowie with Life on Mars in June, following Bolan with 20th Century Boy in March. Bowie even paid homage to Bolan in the song Lady Stardust, originally titled He Was All Right, a song for Mark, which wistfully described a glittery rocker much like Bolan. But as 1973 unfolded, Bowie's creative rocket left Earth's atmosphere, while Bolan's began to sputter. Bolan's 1973 album Tanks was surprisingly only a moderate success, and its singles failed to reach the stratospheric heights of his earlier hits. The signs of trouble weren't just on the charts. Behind the scenes, Bolan's personal life and habits were veering off course. The once slender elf with the ethereal cheekbones was rapidly gaining weight and getting lost in a haze of alcohol and cocaine indulgence. It happens to most rock stars, Tony Visconti said of Bolan's mid-70s decline. We'd be in the studio saying, "What's going on? Why is he shouting at us?" Mark would be womanizing and cheating on his wife, June. She was the first to leave. I left after her. I couldn't take it any longer. The excesses of fame had caught up to Mark. Brandy and champagne binges, heavy cocaine use, non-stop touring, and the classic trap of believing one's own hype. In his mid-20s, Bolan was perilously close to becoming a self-parody of the cosmic dancer he had once portrayed. The turmoil took a toll on his closest relationships. Bolan's marriage to June Child, the loyal companion who had been his lover, chauffeur and confidant since before the fame, began to crumble under his infidelities and erratic ego. By late 1973, June had separated from Mark, exhausted by life with a mercurial rock star, though their divorce was never finalized. Bolan quickly moved on, both romantically and artistically. He fell in love with Gloria Jones, the soulful American singer who had joined T-Rex's tour. Gloria brought out a softer, more affectionate side of Mark and shared his passion for music. Around the same time, key members of Bolan's professional circle drifted away. Visconti, who had guided Mark from hippie obscurity to superstardom, grew alienated by Bolan's ego and excess. Visconti departed to focus on other projects, notably producing Bowie, leaving Bolan without his most trusted musical ally. Even John Peel, Bolan's earliest champion, soured on his former protege, sensing that Mark's flower child sincerity had curdled into narcissism. The once gushing music press turned critical and even cruel. In 1975, Melody Maker sniped that Bolan had become a faded old tart on stage, a rather vicious assessment of an artist still only 28 years old. Another critic mocked the portly, sequin-clad Bolan as the glittering chipolata. Such barbs wounded Mark, who had always cared deeply about image, and had always been quick to point out his superiority in that department. Being likened to a sparkly sausage was a chastening experience, and one which finally deflated his Zeppelin-sized ego. Bolan was forced to take stock. Mark found a formula that he stuck with, which in the end didn't serve him well, Visconti observed, noting that Bolan's reluctance to reinvent himself had cost him dearly. The kids who once squealed for him were growing up, and there were fewer new teens to take their place. Glam rock as a movement was fading by 1975, superseded by heavier rock, disco, and the coming punk storm. Bolan's muse, so brilliant at the dawn of the decade, also seemed to be fizzling rather than sizzling in these latter years. Even some of his musician friends found his new material lackluster. "It was just fifth form poetry. It didn't mean anything," said Steve Harley, Bolan's friend and fellow rocker. He called Mark's mid-70s songs lazy compared to the mystical poetry of his early Tyrannosaurus Rex days. Yet even as Bolan struggled, he hadn't entirely lost his creative spark. In mid-1976, he scored a modest comeback hit with I Love to Boogie, a simple danceable tune that reached number 13 on the charts. The song's success led to a one-off TV special, Rolling Bolan, and fanned the embers of Mark's faded fame. Around this time, Bolan took a big step toward personal renewal. He became a father. In September 1975, Gloria Jones gave birth to their son, whom they named Roland Bolan. Holding his baby boy in his arms, Mark seemed to find a new grounding. The birth of Roland helped reset his compass, one friend observed, as the responsibility of parenthood tempered some of Bolan's wilder impulses. He moved the family to Los Angeles for a fresh start. Amid the palm trees and smog of 1975 to 76 LA, Bolan trimmed down his formerly decadent lifestyle. He lost weight and joked about dieting in interviews, cut his hair into a tight curly mop and focused on songwriting again. He recorded the album Dandy in the Underworld, which had a darker, more reflective tone, befitting someone who had been through the fame ringer. Slowly, the pieces for a second act were falling into place. Little by little, the former glam prince who had spiraled into excess was fighting his way back to stability and relevance. By the mid-1970s, Mark Bolan was learning hard lessons in humility. The man once described by a journalist as a beglittered Don Quixote, loudly tilting against windmills for his pompous antics, was now looking in the mirror and seeing Mark Feld from Hackney again. Older, chastened, but not defeated. If the first act of Bolan's career was a rocket ride to stratospheric fame, the second act would be about redemption and reinvention. Bolan's story was far from over, and a surprising comeback was on the horizon. But so was the fateful twist that would turn his life into one of rock's immortal legends. As the late 70s dawned and punk rock shook the music scene, many of yesterday's stars felt suddenly like dinosaurs. But not Mark Bolan. Instead of resenting the new wave, Bolan embraced it like some kind of glittering phoenix. After all, a decade earlier, he had been the teenage upstart shocking his elders. Now he saw a bit of himself in the punk kids with spiky hair and three-chord anthems. In early 1977, Bolan embarked on a UK tour to promote Dandy in the Underworld. In a shrewd move, he invited an up-and-coming punk band, The Damned, to be T-Rex's opening act. Some in the industry scratched their heads at the pairing, but Bolan understood publicity and the value of seeming relevant to the next generation. The tour was a modest success and, more importantly, a jolt of energy for Mark. Mark was firing on all cylinders, remembered Captain Sensible of The Damned. He'd got rid of his drug habit. He'd gone through his arrogant stage. He was almost humble. He was getting fit. The cheekbones were coming back. He was excited. He had a great band, and the songs were getting better. Indeed, on stage during that tour, the old Bolan swagger was back. He was the cosmic elf king once more, shimmying and grinning as he belted out both fresh tunes and classic hits to delighted crowds. Back in London, Bolan's rebirth gained momentum. That summer, ITV offered him his own music television show for young audiences, simply titled Mark. It was a golden opportunity to reintroduce himself to the public, especially teenagers who only knew his name from their older siblings' record collections. Bolan, ever the showman, grabbed the chance. He was very excited, as you would be, recalled friend Steve Harley. He saw every little appearance on the small screen as making him more famous in Sainsbury's. Mark loved it all. He loved the adulation and the recognition. He thrived on it. The Mark Show, which began airing in August 1977 in a children's TV time slot, was a kitschy, joyous romp. Bolan hosted and performed new songs, introduced guest bands, he gave early TV breaks to punk and new wave acts like Generation X and The Jam, and engaged in goofy skits. He seemed to genuinely relish playing the elder statesman of pop for a new generation of kids, smiling, strutting, and occasionally poking fun at his own glam rock legacy. For the show's final episode, in September 1977, Bolan lined up a very special guest, David Bowie. It was a poetic reunion. The two glitter trailblazers, who had started out together in the 60s, diverged in the 70s, and now, in a sense, were coming full circle. Bowie, fresh from his infamous and spectacularly brilliant Berlin creative period, agreed to appear. On September 7th, 1977, at Granada Television Studios, Bowie and Bolan stood side by side for the first time in years. Bowie performed his new single Heroes, crooning and playing keyboard as Bolan watched proudly from the stage. Then as the credits rolled, the old friends launched into a spontaneous jam of a bluesy number they'd written together called Standing Next to You. What happened next would become pop culture legend. In his enthusiasm, Bolan stepped a bit too far back and suddenly disappeared from view. The situation was now less standing next to you, but more lying on the floor after falling on his arse. He had tumbled clean off the small stage, landing on the studio floor, guitar and mic stand crashing with him. The cameras caught Bowie's reaction. He burst into surprised laughter, flashing a delighted grin at the absurdity of his glamorous buddy wiping out. Bowie couldn't resist taking a swipe at his mate. "Could we have a wooden box for Mark to stand on?" he called out. In the edited broadcast, the incident was left in, and it's a bittersweet gem of footage. Bowie laughing, Bolan picking himself up with an embarrassed chuckle, and the two sharing a last moment of unguarded camaraderie. Backstage after the taping, Bowie and Bolan chatted warmly, making plans to do something together again soon. They hugged and Bowie departed. It was the last time they would see each other. A week later, Mark Bolan would be gone. On the night of September the 15th, 1977, Mark and Gloria Jones went out for a celebratory evening in a London's West End. It would prove to be Bolan's last ride, and it would not be on a White Swan, but inside an Austin Mini. Gloria had just returned to the UK from California, where she had been recording an album, and Bolan wanted to mark the occasion with a night on the town. They dined and sipped wine at Morton's, an upscale bistro in Mayfair's Berkeley Square, as the hours grew late. Bolan, buoyant that day from positive press about his TV show and the general upturn in his fortunes, drank with gusto, perhaps a bit too much gusto. By around 4 a.m, the couple decided to head home to their house in the suburban neighbourhood of East Sheen. They climbed into Bolan's purple Mini, a small car well suited to his petite frame, with Gloria at the wheel. True to his lifelong phobia, Bolan never learned to drive, but he trusted Gloria's abilities. In a second car, Gloria's brother Richard and singer Vicky Aram followed behind them to ensure they got home safely. It was a quiet, damp early morning as their Mini headed southwest through the deserted streets. Approaching Barnes Common, a leafy area by the Thames, the little car entered a treacherous curve on Queen's Ride, a spot locals knew as an accident black spot. Whether due to the wet road, the car's suboptimal maintenance, or sheer bad luck, the Mini failed to make the turn. Shortly before 5 a.m, after crossing a humpback bridge, it struck a raised steel-reinforced fence post, went airborne for an instant, then came crashing down nose first. The car careened off the pavement and violently slammed into a broad sycamore tree on the roadside. The impact on the front passenger side was catastrophic. The Mini's front end accordioned, its roof buckled, glass exploded from the headlights and windows. Inside, the force wrenched Bolan's seat off its mounts and hurled him backward into the rear of the car. The 29-year-old pop star likely died upon that instant, never uttering a sound. Gloria, in the driver's seat, was knocked unconscious and suffered horrendous injuries, including a broken arm and jaw, but miraculously survived. The grisly scene was discovered moments later by Richard Jones and Vicky Aram, who arrived at the scene moments after the crash. Vicky Aram recounted, As I came over the bridge with Richard beside me, I can still in my mind see so clearly a purple car, which looked like a little Beetle. It was upright and it was smoking, and there was a tiny glimmer of light from the moon. The night was so still. Next on the scene was a local dairy worker, Philip Evans Lowe, en route to his early shift. When I arrived, a girl was lying on the bonnet, and a man with long dark curly hair was stretched out in the road. There was a hell of a mess, he described. Aram and Richard had tried to remove both Mark and Gloria from the smoking Mini. Police and ambulances soon swarmed the site. Rescuers found Bolan with no pulse. He was pronounced dead at the scene at 4:48 a.m. at the age of 29. Gloria, semi-conscious and moaning in shock, was rushed to the hospital. The tree that ended Bolan's life had split the car almost in two. Such was the force of impact. It was a cruel irony that the man who had always feared a violent end in a car had indeed met his fate in one, just a mile from his home, in a manner eerily similar to his teenage idol, Eddie Cochran. As word of Bolan's death spread later that morning, fans and friends were incredulous. It seemed unthinkable that this eternally youthful figure, who just weeks earlier had been romping on children's TV, was gone. David Bowie, informed by phone in New York, was reportedly devastated, breaking down in tears. Tony Visconti, in Berlin at the time, caught the first flight to London. It was such a jolt that I had to find the nearest place to get a drink, Visconti remembered. I remember gulping down about 3 shots of something just to handle the news. I couldn't gather my thoughts. I couldn't. The shockwaves were felt across the music world. Mark Bolan had been on the cusp of a comeback, seemingly conquering his demons. And now he had joined the tragic pantheon of rock stars who died before 30. Bolan's funeral took place on September 20th, 1977, at Golders Green Crematorium in North London. Mourners included his parents Phyllis and Sid, his estranged wife June, who arrived veiled and distraught, and a number of prominent rock figures. David Bowie attended quietly in the crowd, sunglasses hiding his eyes, while Rod Stewart, Steve Harley, and members of the Damned also paid respects. Elton John, unable to attend, sent a dramatic floral wreath in the shape of a white swan. In accordance with Jewish custom, Bolan was Jewish through his father. The funeral was held quickly and without excessive pomp. But outside the crematorium, hundreds of fans gathered, many openly weeping or dressed in glitter and feather boas as a tribute to their fallen idol. As Bolan's coffin, painted white, was carried in, some devotees softly sang the chorus of Get It On, their voices trembling. The press noted the poignant tableau. Bolan's and Gloria's 22-month-old son Roland was present, too young to grasp the loss, nestled in his mother's arms amid the sea of mourners. In the aftermath, questions and controversy swirled. Some tabloids insinuated that Gloria had been intoxicated while driving, though those close to her vehemently denied it. Gloria had a lot of self-control. She was the type to have one drink, then call it quits, one friend insisted. An examination of the wreckage revealed potential mechanical issues, underinflated tyres and loose wheel nuts from a recent service that may have contributed to the crash. But ultimately, it was chalked up as a tragic accident. Bolan's own eerie remarks about dying young suddenly echoed in headlines. I get a funny feeling that I shan't be here very long. It frightens me sometimes, he had admitted at the height of his fame. And in a macabre bit of gallows humour, he once joked that if James Dean died in a Porsche, I'd like to die in a Mini. Fate, it seemed, was listening. One small solace emerged from the tragedy. The music community rallied to support Bolan's loved ones, particularly Gloria and little Roland. Because Bolan and Gloria were not married and he died without a will, legal ownership of his estate defaulted to his estranged wife June, leaving Gloria and Roland in a precarious position. In this void, David Bowie quietly stepped in. Honouring what friends say was a promise he had made to Mark, Bowie became a guardian figure for Roland. He set up a trust fund and made anonymous payments to ensure Gloria and her son stayed afloat, even covering Roland's school tuition as he grew up. Bowie never publicised these acts. They only came to light years later when Roland himself acknowledged that David's generosity helped my mother and me to survive. It wasn't just the financial help, but the time and kindness. It was a final, touching testament to the bond between the two glam rock comrades. long after the glitter had settled, Bowie proved to be the truest of friends. At Mark Bolan's funeral, David Bowie offered a simple, heartfelt tribute. The only tribute I can give Mark is that he was the greatest little giant in the world. In that phrase, Bowie captured the paradox of Bolan, a diminutive man with towering presence. Despite all the public jousting, those who knew them say Bowie and Bolan truly cared for each other. They were very close. There was a real love there. They were very similar in so many ways. They could have been brothers, reflected publicist Keith Altham, who worked with both men. Every year on the anniversary of his death, fans gather at the site on Barnes Common, where a memorial plaque now simply reads Mark Bolan, 1947 to 1977. They decorate the tree, now known as the Bolan tree, with flowers, glitter and notes, turning the crash site into a shrine of love and music. Mark Bolan's life was operatic in its highs and lows, a technicolor saga of fantasy and fallibility. He will remain the eternal 20th century boy who taught us all how to boogie. Well, that's another one wrapped up. It's quite interesting that many Americans don't realise just how enormous T-Rex and Mark Bolan were in the UK. Probably more beloved here than the Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin, but unlike those two, never really broke America. If he'd had a few more years, who knows, he might have been as famous as his old mate Bowie across the Atlantic. I hope you enjoyed this one. As ever, I'd be much obliged if you'd hit the old like button. And of course, drop me a comment to tell me about your favourite T-Rex track. Maybe you're like me and prefer the early Tyrannosaurus Rex records. Deborah, now that's a great tune, I think. Have a little gander at the members area if you want to pitch in and help me out. Until next time, I've been Chester. Have a good one.